Morning, West Coast Trail hikers. This is Brett. I'm the maker of the West Coast Trail app, and I wanted to make a really quick video today to talk about weather planning on the West Coast Trail. There's some pretty interesting weather coming up this next week. Talks of an atmospheric river and a lot of things very wet and soggy on the West Coast Trail. So I wanted to do a really quick video just to talk about three different resources that I use for weather planning on the trail. One is a very broad area forecast. Two, I'll talk very briefly about the West Coast Trail app's weather feature. And then three, I want to deep dive, and we'll spend most of this video talking about a professional grade app called Windy, and how to use that and think about weather models and their impact and which are the interesting ones for the West Coast Trail in particular. I'll take it from a complete beginner, nobody knows anything about weather or weather models guide, and kind of walk you through some of the features and how to get the best out of that pro grade app too. For your West Coast Trail hike. So yeah, without further ado, let me jump in and do some screen sharing. Okay, so first up is the Weather Network forecast. And if you just go ahead and Google for West Coast Trail weather, you will be taken here. And this is kind of the broadest, the broadest forecast you can get. And it's really useful for just looking at what the sense of the weather is going to be like in the next 14 days or so. But it's generally not terribly accurate, especially the further out you go. So if I look here, if I scroll down, the amazing thing about it is I can click on view full 14 days and it will give me a really good long-term forecast over the next couple of weeks, which is really handy to see. And if you look here, obviously Saturday, Sunday has got a lot of rain coming in, high chance of precipitation. Actually, let me flip back to this view, you can get more detail. There's a high probability of precipitations, but it's going to be raining all day. And then a substantial amount of rain here on Sunday, calling for somewhere between 30 and 40 millimeters total in that 24-hour period. And so, obviously something to watch out for. But it doesn't give you a lot of detail about when does that rain fall. Is that rain falling at night? Is that rain falling in the morning? In the afternoon? Like, are there going to be open times during the day? And then the other thing it doesn't really do a good job of is, it's covering a very, very broad area. And, the West Coast Trail has a lot of different microclimates, and it's such a long span of trail that, it could be raining in the north and it could be sunny in the south. So it's a lot better to have pinpoint forecasts where specifically where you're going to be, because for certain days of your hike, you're going to be more concentrated on the north side or more concentrated on the south side, or maybe more in the middle. And the weather conditions locally at that region matters a lot. Before we switch gears here and start looking at Windy, I want to pause and talk a little bit about some kind of geeky details about weather models. And you've probably heard this term thrown around a lot by enthusiasts. What model are you using to predict your weather data? And a lot of times it's kind of confusing. A lot of people don't understand it. And so let's take a moment to just talk about what a weather model is, so that when I open up Windy and I start looking at a variety of weather models, kind of what I'm talking about and why I'm referring to them and why there's a difference between various weather models. So, at its core, a weather model is simply, it's basically a bunch of computer code that takes a ton of inputs about weather. It has a way of detailing how it views the landscape, and then it produces an output, which is the forecast of the weather, right? And so the inputs are going to be things like information received from satellites. They're going to be information received from ground radar and weather radar. They're going to be information from various weather stations that are on the ground or instruments. And all of these things are reporting weather at various points in the ocean and land, wherever these instruments are placed. And they're factors that are used in doing sort of mathematical predictions on how the weather is going to change over time. And a weather model is going to be either global or very regional in nature. For example, there is one weather model we'll talk about in a bit in detail called the European Weather Forecast. And that's a global weather model, right? Like every time the supercomputers that calculate the forecasts using the European weather forecast they run for the entire world, right? They do weather predictions for the entire planet at a time, and they can produce just massive amounts of forecast data that can be assimilated by other things. Regional models, for example, might be just based on North America or Canada, and they are, generally more detailed because they understand, the topography of those regions and, the unique attributes of, various points along that way. The other thing to factor in for any given weather model is what resolution is it running at? And resolution is a way you can think of, I'll show you an example of how it looks on the West Coast Trail, a way of slicing up the world into little boxes, and then it computes unique weather attributes for each box based on, how it looks. Anyway, these things all get added up. There's a ton of math, there's a ton of prediction analysis, and the output is a forecast, and the forecast either says it's going to rain, it's not going to rain, here's how much rain is going to fall, here's the probability of that happening. And those models are basically computed on a update frequency. Some of them may run once a day, some of them may run twice a day, some of them may run every hour. And depending on the pros and cons of different models, that's really important to know too. So we'll talk about that as we go through. So let me show you another a sense of resolution here. So here's a map of the West Coast Trail in the background here. You can see Bamfield in the upper left and Port Renfrew in the lower right. And there's probably really hard to read in video, but there's a couple of little waypoints along the way. And they're Thrasher Campsite, Kamana Campsite, Suziat, and Michigan. And this is a 12-kilometer resolution model. So you can see this grid is every 12 kilometers, and you can really get a sense of how, how broad, right? Yeah, this resolution might be. Now there is 1, 2, 3, 4, let's say 5 boxes spanning the West Coast Trail here. So you can get a pretty good sense of what's going to happen at the north end versus the south end, but maybe not a little bit of nuance of what's happening between Suziat and Klanoa, for example. So as we go increase resolution, this is a 9-kilometer resolution grid. And so this is better, right? Kind of slices the world up into more detail. And then finally, there's, the more accurate forecasts, which are operating on a 3-kilometer resolution grid. And you can see here, man, it's a big deal, right? Like it's really sliced the trail up into a lot of different grids. And every grid on this view here gets its own unique forecast based on, a whole bunch of factors of what the topography is like behind it, in front of it, how much exposed to the ocean is getting, if it's sheltered or not sheltered. All these things come into play for the forecast. So, that really gives you a sense of the big difference between a 12-kilometer resolution model and a 3-kilometer resolution model. So let's talk about the names of some very specific weather models that are good for the West Coast Trail, in my opinion. And, I'd love to, I'm not a weather expert by any stretch of the means. I'm getting smarter about it as I learn more. I'd love to hear from folks like, professional guides like Mike Blake, for example, who use these models a lot of what they see mapping to reality in the field. But this is the best of my knowledge at this point in time. So, in Windy, you will see probably 7 or 8 different models. I would say ignore all of them for these 3 instead of these 3. These are the 3 most interesting ones, in my opinion. And I'll tell you when to use them and what they're best for. So first of all is the European forecast, the ECMWF, which is the European Center for Medium Range Weather. This is a great forecast. This is really the gold standard for global weather. Pretty much every weather site that you see, on the web that's offering a broad forecast, for example, the Pacific Rim National Park site we looked at a little bit ago, is using this European forecast because it's very good. It's very accurate. It's usually pretty accurate. Fairly reasonably accurate far out, maybe like within 10 days or something. But it really gets mostly interesting, to be honest, within about 72 hours of an event, especially for things like rain. It can be wildly inaccurate, 9 days out for a rain event. It knows there's a big rain event coming, but it doesn't know the specifics of that rain event yet. And so often you see these really scary numbers. Like if you were to look for this weather event that's coming next week, if you were to look at the numbers from from a week ago, they were predicting 150 millimeters of rain, which is an insane amount of rain. And now they're down to kind of 30 to 50 millimeters of rain, which is still a lot of rain, but that's a heck of a lot different than 150 millimeters. So you can see as we get closer to the event, within 72 hours, these predictions get a lot better. The European model forecast is a 9-kilometer resolution, so it's pretty accurate, especially considering they're doing the entire globe, and it tends to update every 12 hours or so. So great forecast for, hey, I'm going to go on my trip. What's it going to look like for the 7 days on my trip? Kind of roughly. Is it going to rain? Is it not going to rain? Is going to be, your European forecast is going to give you a good sense of that. The next one is the NAM, the North American mesoscale. That one gets really interesting within about 48 hours of an event. So within about 4 days, an event starts to become more accurate. This is a model that's produced by NOAA here in the US. And it's really designed to be a short range forecast. And it has very localized weather, and it's kind of good at understanding complex terrains, right? Like the European model, because it's calculating for such a massive global geography, it doesn't have as much of a rich information about maybe some of the detailed terrain and topography and unique things that might go into impact certain regions. Whereas the NAM is going to do a much better job of that. So as you get within that 48-hour window, the NAM is something that I'd probably start looking at. So this is probably good for like, hey, is it going to rain on me, 2 or 3 days from now, and what's that going to look like? And then the HRRR stands for High Resolution Rapid Refresh. This is a really good model to be using when you're on the trail, really. It's mostly good up to within probably about 18 hours of the event. So it's like, hey, what's going to happen tonight? Is it going to rain tonight? Is it going to rain on me today? What are those hour by hour rain windows going to look like? Am I going to get a break in the middle of the day? And it's really accurate. It's down to that 3-kilometer resolution we saw in the resolution scale. This is a pretty cool one because it updates depending on the weather provider. I think Windy actually might cache this a little bit more frequently, but depending on your weather provider, these can update every hour and give you a better, always improving forecast of what things are going to look like within the next 3 to 4, 6 hours or so throughout your hiking day. And super interesting. So that's a little bit of background on weather models. With that, I'm going to flip over to Windy, and let's talk about Windy and how to set it up for your West Coast trail experience and how to use it when you're on the trail. The demo with the desktop app here, the mobile app is kind of the same. It's just you're in a small constrained screen, but the desktop's probably going to be easy to demo on. I use the desktop when I'm kind of pre-trail hiking anywhere. It's just kind of easier to interact with and get bigger data, but essentially the same thing. So the first thing, I've zoomed in on the West Coast Trail region here. And the way Windy works, if I go ahead and switch to the rain layer here, over here on the left, I can select between things like radar, satellite view, wind, rain, temperature, all these kind of weather elements. We're interested in rain on the most part. So I'm going to click on the rain layer. And because like when we talked about those grids earlier, Windy needs to know what forecast I'm interested in for a specific area on the trail. And the way it does that is you simply, this is for people who never used Windy before, you simply tap on the map, it'll give you this little, pointer, and you can drop this pointer on any exact sort of location, latitude, longitude you're interested in along the trail. So let's say I'm interested in, the middle here. I think this is Suziat Falls over here, maybe. Or actually, let's do the Crab Shack. Crab Shack's right here. I would drop my pin here. It would tell me how many millimeters of rain are in the forecast right now. And then to get into the juicy detail, what I would do is I would drop down this little drop down. It would give me the forecast for that location and give me all of the information at the bottom here down below. So one thing before I go into the forecast, I find this is kind of the one thing I didn't like the most about Windy is that I find it really hard to look at this view of the West Coast Trail and really understand, where are the campsites and where are the bits of the trail that I care about. And so one way you can work around that with Windy that's quite useful is you can create favorites. And if for example, I can zoom in here and I might find a camper, and I'm gonna go ahead and put my cursor here where the campsite is. I'm gonna cursor where camper is. I'm gonna expand that forecast, and here it's gonna say Camper Creek Area F, and I can click favorite here and add it to my favorites. And so when you do that, if I go to the menu on mobile, it's really handy too. I can go to the menu and go to my favorites, and it will give me a list of my favorite locations along the trail. And so here, actually, what I've done is I've set up 4 camps on the trail. I've got Michigan at KM11, Suziat, Kamana, and Thrasher on the trail. And you can see at a nice little glance here, kind of what the daily forecasts are going to be, what the rain amounts are going to be, predictions, and when you're going to encounter good weather and bad weather. So that's a nice handy view. But let me pop back out here to the bigger map, and the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pop over to the menu here. I'm going to scroll down to the settings of what I want shown on the map. I'm going to say I want to see my favorites on the map. Close that menu. And now I can see the campsites along the way, right? So I can see Michigan, Suziat, Kamana. Okay, so let's say I'm interested in what's going on at Kamana. So I'm going to click on that. And it's going to bring up the forecast on usually a 3-hour window. So for example, I'm looking at Friday here, 8 a.m., 11, 2, 5, 8. But I'm much more interested in like an hourly blow by blow. So down here's a little switch to turn on the 1-hour forecast. And when I turn that on, now I can see every hour along the trail. And that's more interesting to me. The other thing to think about is so here's the models. Remember we talked about models earlier? So this is how I can select the different models. So here's the European forecast. Here's the NAM forecast. So this is 72-hour window. The NAM forecast, 48-hour window. And the really up-to-date HR, high rate rapid refresh, HRRR. And I can flip between the models just by clicking between them. Another interesting thing to look at is kind of when do the models start to converge, because that's when accuracy gets interesting too. So to do that, I can look at the compare tab. I'll click on that, and it'll bring up, it's a little bit overwhelming at first, it'll bring up this huge sheet showing kind of the hour by hour horizontally, and then vertically you've got each model. This is a model called GFS, here's the European model, here's an Icon model, a Meteo Blue model, the NAM, the HRRR we talked about, kind of all the models down there on the left. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to clean this up a little bit. I have a script that I've written that will get rid of some of these models, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. Let me just kind of refresh the page here real quick, and I'll go back to Kamana to get the forecast there. And if I expand the comparisons, now you'll see the just 3 models on the left, the 3 I talked about earlier, the European model, the NAM, and the HRRR. So let's look at what this is going to look like in the coming days, because we're actually getting pretty close to this rain event right now. Things look pretty good today. Friday, Friday night, looks like we got some rain coming in. And generally the models agree, right? The European model is predicting about 0.5 millimeter of rain starting about 10 o'clock on Friday. That's pretty much what the NAM's predicting. The HRRR might not be in full accuracy. Remember, that's like an 18-hour window yet. So this could be, they're predicting that it's going to hit around midnight. It may be more accurate at this point, we're not sure, but I think all of them agree there's going to be rain through the night on Friday night. And then going into Sunday here, if I scroll to the left, this is where things get a little more interesting. And already the predictions are getting a lot better than they were. They were pretty gloomy earlier in the week, but they're looking a lot better now. The European model says that things are going to get, we're probably 36 hours from this event right now. Oh, actually, no, that's looking at Saturday. I'm sorry. So yeah, this is Saturday. So we're 24 hours from this event right now. So the NAM should be probably the most accurate at this point. And the HRR isn't quite there yet. So looking down at the NAM, we're looking at kind of rain Saturday morning, kind of, pretty light rain, like half a mil here, 0.2 mil here, kind of broken rain, sun, and then, a little bit heavier shower coming through around 3 or 4 o'clock. Be a good time to take a shelter under a top there and carry on hiking later on in the evening as things warm up. So as I scroll to the right here and we get into Sunday, you'll see actually, here's one interesting thing about windy. You'll see that HRR doesn't have, because it's a short-term forecast, it's designed the 18-hour window, it doesn't forecast out very long. And so as you see, once I get this little thing here is telling me that to the left of this point in time is HRR forecast. And because there's no data for HRR going further out, they've switched and they're showing me the GFS forecast, which is probably one of my least favorites maybe, off to the right here. So everything out here is GFS. Same with the NEM forecast here. Once you get to this point in time, they switch to the GFS forecast. And so that's why these two look the same here, because they're actually GFS. They're not different models at this point. Whereas up here, you're still looking at the European forecast because that can forecast 10 days out. So anyways, we get into Sunday here. The European model says, hey, things get pretty feisty by Sunday afternoon. We've got, roughly 3 millimeters of rain coming in. So pretty good shower Sunday afternoon. The NAM should be a little bit more accurate at this point, be my guess. Although it's getting to the bounds of its accuracy window. And they're predicting on Sunday that the actually rainstorm's going to hit a little earlier. So it's going to hit probably 5 a.m. in the morning and then be building to about 10 and then tapering off so that the afternoon is better, which is counter to what the European forecast is saying at this point. And the HRR just doesn't have enough data at this point to be useful. So these are things you want to look at as you get close to the event, looking at that European forecast, looking at the NAM, and then getting down into the high resolution forecast as you get to overnight and get closer on the front. So yeah, that's kind of windy on the most part. I mean, the other thing that's super useful that I use a lot around here is the weather radar. And this is kind of like a real-time radar. And I don't know if there's any interesting weather events going on. I'm going to probably have to zoom out here and find something interesting happening somewhere else in the world to make this useful. Actually, looks like some rain going on up in Campbell River right now. Let's jump into that, and I can kind of give you a sense of that. So the way the weather radar works is that it captures weather radar for kind of the last 10 minutes of what the radar has seen for weather. So remember, this isn't really forecast at this point. This is kind of telling you what's just happened. The weather radar shows this, kind of heavy area. This is light rain here, the purple, this greener color. You can see down here, there's a scale. So the blue is lighter rain, the purple gets heavier rain. If it were red or orange, that's very heavy rain. So there's kind of a light shower happening up here in the Gold River region. And if I push the play button down here on the weather radar, you'll see it animate and show you kind of what the radar did over time. And so if I play that, you can see pretty obviously that, there's rain coming in off those mountains there from the sea, and it's headed to the northeast, and you can see it kind of blowing over Gold River there and heading towards Campbell River. And pretty soon, Campbell River is probably going to get a little bit of a rain shower going over it. And this weather radar is amazing. Like if you're on a hike and the clouds sort of turn black and look a little feisty, this is kind of the first thing I'd pull out. I use another app called My Radar, but it's amazing that Windy has this too. It might be part of their premium offering. But it's really good to see if there's a shower coming in that's really localized to where you are on the trail. You might, hey, this is coming in. It's probably only going to last 15 or 20 minutes. I'm just going to go take shelter for a bit under a big tree in the forest and get off the beach because I'm going to be most exposed on the beach. So yeah, this weather radar is super handy and it's good to have in your arsenal. So anyway, windy is definitely the the gold standard of weather forecasting apps. It's a lot more complicated to use. It's a lot more complicated to learn, a lot fussier. But if you know how to wield this and you learn it before you're out on the trail, it can make a big difference between having a good time on the trail and avoiding some of the bad times on the trail too. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is the West Coast Trail app weather feature, which is part of the Pro subscription. This is kind of a sort of a happy compromise between the complexity and the detail and the power of Windy and the kind of abstract and broad area network you're getting from the the West Coast Trail Pacific Rim forecast. So here what I've done is I've gone ahead and pre-programmed all of these GPS locations along the trail. So you can just go ahead and select the campsite you're staying at or headed towards, or where you think you're going to be on the trail at this point in time, and get a forecast for that location. The app will download forecasts every time you connect and you're online, and then it will cache those forecasts. And so they'll be available through when you're offline. So for example, if you're at camp in the morning, you can go online, get a forecast, and you can use that forecast throughout the day without going online. Whereas Windy, you have to always be online in order to use it and get their forecast data. Down here, it will tell you when the forecast was actually last generated, so you can get a sense of how stale your forecast is, and maybe you need to go back online to get a new one. So here you can choose the location. It'll pick along that grid for you. And under the hood, what it's doing is it's using those same models, but it's sort of picking the right model for the right situation. So for example, when I look under today, Friday's model, because we're within the 18-hour window, it's going to show you forecast data from the HRRR model, because that's the most accurate for that hour by hour blow. And you'll see those numbers changing fairly frequently if you're updating hourly. If you're looking 4 or 5 days out, then you're going to see generally data from that European forecast that's going to be more accurate out there. So here I picked Kamana, which is the thing we were looking at earlier. Let's drill into Sunday, because that was where the interesting rain event is. Here it's saying 95% chance of rain. And if I expand that, I can get a little bit more detail, and then I get the hourly by hourly blow here. And I can just kind of touch swipe this and move throughout the day. Here kind of similar. I think this is the European forecast data that we just saw in Windy. The same thing, kind of rain, drizzle starting early in the morning, and then kind of building into more of a crescendo around 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, heavy rain, and then tapering off as you go into the evening. So that's kind of the outlook in the European forecast, and that's going to change obviously as you get closer to the actual event and that high rate rapid refresh kicks in. So here, looking at Friday, today looks pretty nice out there. It looks just cloudy and overcast, and no rainfall at all. And then if I expand Saturday, you'll see Friday night tonight there's a little bit of drizzle coming in throughout the night, a little bit of early morning drizzle, and then tiny little shower, maybe kind of squall come rolling in. This is probably just localized to Kamana here for 2 o'clock. And then not much to talk about on Saturday, and then Sunday's where it gets most interesting. So anyway, that's the weather app. It's kind of in between the two. Whichever one you choose to use, good luck, and hope everyone stays dry and safe out there.